The diplomatic table just shattered. Trump cancelled the trip. 2 envoys, a 17-hour flight, gone, with one sentence on Truth Social. "We have all the cards, they have none." And then something massive entered the water. For the first time in over 2 decades, 3 nuclear-powered American supercarriers are operating simultaneously across the same theater of war. The USS Gerald R. Ford in the Red Sea, the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea, the USS George H.W. Bush rounding the Cape of Good Hope and entering the fight from below. Together, these floating cities of war carry over 200 fixed-wing aircraft, 15,000 sailors and marines, and a constellation of destroyers, cruisers, attack submarines, and amphibious task groups that now form a continuous ring of steel from the Bab el-Mandeb to the Gulf of Oman. Nothing on this scale has assembled in the region since the opening hours of the 2003 invasion of Iraq, and back then the target was a country that had already been bled by a decade of sanctions. This time the target is the regime that has spent 47 years exporting the doctrine of asymmetric warfare to every corner of the Middle East. And the architecture of that doctrine is now being dismantled in real time by the very tactics it once mocked. The setup that built this moment is older than the carriers themselves. For 2 months, since the joint US and Israeli strikes on February 28th, the war has lived inside a strange pressure chamber, a ceasefire that holds nothing, a blockade that strangles Iran's exports without firing a shot, a counter-blockade that strangles the world's oil supply right back. Brent crude trading north of $100, American gasoline at $4.46 a gallon, 20,000 seafarers stranded on 2,000 merchant ships, eating through their last rations, watching missiles arc over their decks at night. And inside that pressure chamber, one question has been quietly forming in the minds of every analyst watching the Strait. Who actually controls the door? Iran believed it was the gatekeeper. The Revolutionary Guard issued maps, issued tolls, demanded $1 million per ship for safe passage, cut daily traffic by 95%, and called it leverage. Then the math began turning against them, because the Strait does not just carry Iranian oil, it carries Iranian survival. And the moment the United States Navy decided to let everything except Iranian cargo through, that was the moment the cage door closed on the wrong side. The figures are not estimates, they are operational. 3 carriers, deployed, 27 warships, on station, 200 aircraft, airborne or strike-ready, 15,000 troops, forward-positioned, 39 ships, turned around since April 13th. Hundreds of millions of dollars per day, bleeding out of Tehran's energy export pipeline. Iran's response, 20 additional naval mines, scattered through the Strait with a clearance estimate of 6 months. The IRGC believed those mines were a chokehold on the world. Trump's reply was 4 words from the White House podium, delivered by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on a Friday morning. Shoot to destroy, no hesitation. The rules of engagement changed in a single sentence. Any small craft caught laying mines is no longer warned. It is sunk, and then came the move that no one in Tehran had modeled. Project Freedom, announced by Trump on Sunday, May 3rd, beginning Monday, May 4th. 15,000 American personnel, more than 100 land and sea aircraft, drones, destroyers. A mission framed not as combat but as humanitarian rescue, guiding 2,000 stranded merchant ships out of the Strait, past the mines, past the IRGC speedboats, past the Iranian shore batteries, and out into open water. Iran's blockade just got a counter-blockade with a name. Tehran read the move the same way Washington wrote it, as an ultimatum dressed in maritime law. Within hours, the IRGC published new control maps of the Strait. Within hours, Major General Ali Abdullahi went on Iranian state television and promised that any American vessel approaching Hormuz would be attacked. Within hours, Iranian state media claimed 2 missiles had struck a US Navy destroyer. CENTCOM denied it within minutes. Brent crude spiked $4 in the time it took to issue the denial, then settled. The market had absorbed a confrontation that almost happened and was now pricing in the next one. Inside Tehran, the cracks the world had been waiting for began appearing on the surface. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi flew to Moscow on April 27th and was given language instead of weapons. Putin praised the courage of the Iranian people. Putin promised to do everything possible. Putin produced nothing. Russia is too tangled in Ukraine to open a second front and too smart to be seen funding a regime its own ambassador is evacuating. China, the last reliable customer for sanctioned Iranian crude, sent its own message. not in cables, but in chartered evacuation flights pulling Chinese nationals out through Turkmenistan. The UAE, freshly liberated from OPEC production caps, opened the spigot on legal, unlimited, unsanctioned oil. Beijing made the trade in silence. The look-east doctrine that Tehran had spent a decade building dissolved in a single weekend. Inside the IRGC, the panic shifted shape. The civilian government was sidelined. The military wing tried to consolidate decision-making and instead consolidated blame. Generals questioned generals. Diplomats were dismissed. A 14-point peace proposal was sent to Washington through Pakistani channels and rejected within 24 hours. Trump's three-word verdict was that it was not enough. Not enough leverage, not enough surrender, not enough time. This is the moment a regime discovers that its weapon was always its cage. For 47 years, the Strait of Hormuz was the single greatest piece of leverage in the Iranian arsenal. It was the threat that kept administrations cautious. It was the lever that moved oil markets with a speech. It was the geographic accident that made a small revolutionary state into a global energy chokepoint. And in the end, it became the trap that closed around the architects of that very strategy. Because the moment Iran demonstrated it would actually close the strait, the world stopped negotiating with Iran and started negotiating around Iran. The UAE replaced Iranian oil within a quarter. China replaced Iranian sellers within a month. Russia replaced Iranian guarantees with diplomatic flattery. And the United States Navy replaced Iranian sovereignty over the waterway with 3 carrier strike groups operating under unified command. The lever Iran had spent a generation polishing turned into the surface against which it was now being broken. Every element of the regime's deterrence model, the speedboats, the mines, the asymmetric doctrine, the proxy network, the threat of disruption, was answered not with hesitation, but with overwhelming, integrated, kinetic precision. The regime built its entire grand strategy on the assumption that the world could not afford to call its bluff. The world has now called the bluff. The world is calling it every day at $4.46 a gallon, and the world has decided that is the price of finishing this. Tehran is no longer the actor. Tehran is the variable being solved for. The question that remains is not whether the regime can win. It cannot. The question is which exit it chooses. Surrender quietly and accept terms written by an adversary who already controls its waterways, its airspace, and its export markets. Escalate militarily and force a confrontation it has already lost the conventional dimension of against an opponent that has rehearsed every scenario from the deck of a carrier sitting 50 miles off its coast. Or simply continue the slow internal collapse. The fuel shortages, the currency failures, the elite infighting, the public anger boiling under the surface in cities the world stopped watching weeks ago. There is no fourth option. There has not been one for some time. The armada is in the water, the blockade is global, the allies are gone. The cards have already been dealt, and Tehran is holding none of them.